Great. Well, welcome and hello to all our pop listeners. As you know, Presenting Our Presence is a monthly vodcast released on every full moon, co-hosted by myself and Dr. Florence Glanfield. And it is meant to amplify and give space for the contributions of our Indigenous colleagues here at the University of Alberta. And today we have a returning guest, Gil Anderson. Thank you so much, Gil, for coming back and being co-hosting our conversation with myself, yourself, and our visiting pop guest today, Violet Okemaw. So welcome to both of you, and special welcome to Violet. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for joining us today. So I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself in a way that is meaningful to you.
Okay. Thank you for having me. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction of who I am and where I come from in my Anishinaabe language. Pujo anin tanse ojashkubineshi kwe edijnikas Violet Okemaw gae winzawin nigiminigo apijiniminendam nongom e gigawechmiguan chipikagigituan Anishna oketadzik ikituak egawika chuanikang kidibachmuninan kigidoininan Shagugae Ainiwi kit umimiziping ni donji mima kagishe umbigian we batash ningi nagataniwe kagishe umbigiguan Anishna nigigagwechimigok na nigamaganak nimashomsak shigo chi mano uwe ishpik kendamuin chip minijaman. I'm going to try and interpret what I said earlier. I just wanted to say thank you for having me. My spirit name is Blue Thunderbird Woman. I'm originally from Barons River First Nation in Manitoba. I forgot that not everybody may know where Barons River First Nation is. It's in the southeast corner of Lake Winnipeg. And I always like to introduce myself or start my talks in my language because it really grounds me. You know, it kind of gives me that comfort. And I always remember what my grandfather, Nimishomis, said to me. He said, which means, like, don't ever forget where you're from. And you know, at that time when I left my community at 14 years old, I didn't know what that meant. I just thought my grandpa was just being silly, you know. But I fully understand that now, you know, as an older person, fully understand what he meant. You know, don't ever forget where you're from, and always, you know, use your language whenever possible. So I'd like to just start off with that, and maybe the other part that I can share is some of my lived experiences in my community. I lived in my home community of Barons River for at least the first 14 years of my life before I came to Winnipeg for my high school education. But prior to that, I also want to mention that my grandparents had their own trapping grounds away from the community. That that settlement, I guess, was called Sharn Lake. And it was, I think, close to the border of Manitoba and Ontario. So our parents had a cabin out there because my dad was, traditional fisherman, hunter, and trapper. That was his main livelihood, or that was our main livelihood. But in addition to that, there were also other families that were there, like relatives. I remember my grandparents were there all the time, on my father's side, and we also had other grandparents. I guess to us, grandparents were grandparents, right? If they were siblings of the grandparent, then all of them were our grandparents. So they lived out there too. And so that's where I grew up, and I know that for a fact that we spoke our language all the time. Like we always spoke in our language all the time. Our parents taught us in our language. But as we entered, the formal school system, that's when we started learning a lot of the English. And I think that really grounds me as an Indigenous person is the fact that I was so privileged that I was able to grow up on the land, with my parents, and also, relied on the land for livelihood. In regard, let's say, for example, for medicinal purposes. I can't recall if my parents or grandparents relied on Western medicine or hospitals at that time. Always finding the medicines on the land is what I can remember. And my grandmother taking us, to pick medicine with her. And we were very young because when we did move back to the community, I think I was about 5.5 years old or 6 years old, because I entered day school at 6 years old. So I do remember that experience. And, we know a lot about some of the happenings that, that occurred in the day schools. I come from a very large family. I have like 8 brothers and 5 sisters. So there's 14 of us in the family, and we're very fortunate, as I mentioned that today, we're still all very healthy, and majority of us though moved to Winnipeg. Like later on in the years, my dad wasn't well, and he ended up in the hospital, and he had surgery and passed. So after that, that would have been probably in the 1980s. After that, because my mom was quite settled and the rest of the siblings were quite settled in Winnipeg, because that's where his appointments were and that's where his surgery took place. My mom didn't go back to the community, and we were so happy about that, right? Because I left home at 14 years old, to attend high school. So I attended grade 10, 11, and 12 in Winnipeg. And I stayed in they used to call them private home placements. So for grade 10, I lived with a different family. And, there were good experiences living in private home placements, and there were not so good experiences as well. But most of the time, the private home placements that I stayed in were good. I had very good house parents that, encouraged me. They knew I struggled, because I really missed my community, my family at that age. And I felt there wasn't a place to speak my language in the home that I was in, and also, in the community, and also in the school, because we were just taught in English. So I really, really struggled with the English language, I would say, throughout my elementary and high school years. And I often thought about that as a student. I thought, why is it that I'm really struggling, as an Indigenous student? And at that point in my life, I really didn't feel pride in my language at that time, because I was just struggling so much, and I couldn't use my language to learn new things or to get higher education. But at that time, I think around the mid 1970s, they had this, this program where you can actually enroll in taking a language exam, a comprehensive language exam at the high school level. So all I remember was that these consultants came. They were Indigenous Aboriginal consultants that came, and they said, you could get 3 credits for your language, if you want to take the test. They said, we can test you at the grade 10, 11, and 12 levels. And, I was really taken aback. I thought, wow, somebody's going to validate our language, and this, I'm talking about like 1970s, way back in the day. And so I took the exam. It took about a few hours, I think. I remember them telling me to tell a story in the language. They said, we want to know your fluency level. So maybe just tell us a story. You can pick any story you want. Just don't use any English words. So just keep telling a story. And I can't remember what story I told, but I told a story. And then after that, she said, well, there's another component to this language exam. It's actually, there's a literacy component where you have to read and write in your language, be able to read and write to pass the second half. And at that time, I thought, oh no, I've never really written in my language except phonetically, like I could spell Ninijnikazian. I can spell that phonetically. And I was thinking, well, I wonder what kind of a writing system they're going to use for me to try and read this or translate it into the English language. But I managed, because I think the spelling system or the writing system they used for the exam was very phonetic. It was, the way that the words are sounding. So I was able to pass that exam. And I was also able to write some of the translations phonetically. So, and at that point, I guess when I felt more pride in my language, I knew my language was going to be validated. And I felt, I really felt that I was going somewhere with it. And from high school, I actually went to university. I started off at Brandon University. And at that university, they were actually offering courses at that time. They were offering introduction to Ojibwe, introduction to Cree, introduction to Dakota. That's way back in the day. So I took the introduction to Ojibwe, and the courses at that time were set up more about the structure of the language, like the linguistic. There was a linguistic focus to it. So I learned a lot about grammar. I learned a lot about the writing system. And in order for me to feel that I've learned something in those classes is, the fluency really helped. I thought, okay, well, I'm fluent in my language. All I have to do is, pay attention to the writing system that's being introduced, as well as maybe try and write in a consistent way. There were other students, university students at that time, that already lost their language. They understood the language because they may have had maybe parents or grandparents that spoke the language, and they really struggled, in the introductory course, Introduction to Ojibwe at that time. And but they managed. I think there is that understanding that if you're exposed to the language for a long period of time, or during your early years, that you will pick up that language a lot more quickly as you get older, right? So the students that were in those classes, I think eventually, most of them were able to develop the conversational skills that they didn't have initially. So that was my other experience in thinking about language at that point. And I'm thinking, I was in a faculty of, Bachelor of Arts program. And at that time, I thought, I don't know what the Bachelor of Arts degree will give me, but I was very interested in teaching. I thought, okay, well, maybe I can switch over to a Bachelor of Ed program, which I did in the second year, because I thought, if I can go into this Bachelor of Teaching program, maybe I have an opportunity to teach my language or to promote my language, with children, with high school students and so forth. So I ended up taking as many courses as I could, so that will help me in teaching my language eventually. I took as many of the language courses as possible. I also took the Cree language. I didn't take Dakota. I didn't want to try and challenge it because I thought it was just so difficult. I can, when I hear it, I don't understand even a word of the Dakota language. So I kind of thought, okay, I'm not going to go there. So I really studied my own language and the Cree language. So after I took all those courses, I was probably in my second year of university. I also took a look at what was available for second language teaching, because that's all they had during that time in the early 80s was that you could specialize in teaching a second language. So I took some second language methodology courses because I thought the challenge sometimes is that if you're fluent in the language, that doesn't mean that you can teach it. Do you know what I mean? Like I know that some of the teachers, for example, that we had at this elementary school in Winnipeg, they were all fluent speakers because this was going to be the first Aboriginal elementary school in Winnipeg. And they all had specific grade levels that they were teaching, like grade 1, 2, 3, and so forth, right up to junior high. But the other expectation that administration had at that time was that because they were fluent in their language, they were also expected to teach in the language. And some of them were not comfortable with that. And I understand now why that comfort level was not there. Because if, to be an effective teacher, you need to know all about your language, not just the fluency, but also, the different methods that you can use to teach a second language, and also the linguistics. Somebody came up to you and say, how do you translate, I would like to go to the store. So you translate it and you say something like this, but then they look at you and they say, can you spell that out? So you spell it out. But as a teacher, you're going to have to explain like different parts of that word or different parts of that sentence. So that's why I say, it's really important to study your language if you're going to teach it, especially the grammar part of it, because students will ask. They'll ask, well, how do you translate dinosaur? They ask questions like that. So you have to have that linguistic background, the methodology of it, and also, of course, assessment. Like, for example, if you were teaching grade 1 Ojibwe language for 40 minutes a day or whatever, you're not going to teach the same content in grades 2 and 3. If you have the same group of students, obviously you're going to have some sort of higher level learning taking place. If they were counting up to, let's say, 20 in grade 1, you might want to review that at the beginning of grade 3, but move it up to maybe teaching them to count to 30 or 40 or whatever. Just in terms of skill level, so that by the time they reach grade 9 or 10, that they have that basic foundation of language. And I know, it's really difficult to, I guess, setting up a language program, Indigenous language programming, because many times we try and set it up like a Western language program where, you have to teach this in grade 1 and then you have to teach that in grade 3 and so forth. And the reason why I say that is because, like right now when I'm thinking, my parents didn't say to me, okay, Violet, sit down and let's count to 30, like that. So it's a different type of learning, that takes place. Like my learning was very holistic and very situational, right? And by that, I mean, like I knew my numbers by just the different types of conversations that I engaged in and the different lived experiences that I've had, during my early years. So that was, that had a lot to do with me continuing on with promoting and teaching the Anishinaabe language. And then from elementary to high school, because I also taught high school Ojibwe, and in a school, our first Aboriginal high school in Winnipeg, I taught the grades 10 to 12 Ojibwe language. And it was really interesting because I knew the students understood the language. It wasn't that they were coming into class without knowing a word, right? They would have had somebody at home, maybe an auntie or a grandma or a great grandma that spoke the language, but they weren't fluent themselves. So the language had to be, the language classes had to be set up like a little bit differently, because I didn't want them coming to my class and repeating after me, repeating all the numbers, repeating all the names of animals. Like I knew that they've gone through that process at some point. So I concentrated on doing more conversational, situations where they would learn dialogues and so forth, and they would be able to provide some sort of responses, but really talking in the language all the time so that they're hearing it, not necessarily speaking it right away. I had students in my class that wouldn't even want to repeat anything I said. And that was fine, but they were there and I knew they were listening and I knew they were understanding the language. And what became more challenging is that as a language teacher at the high school level, you have to apply a Western type of an assessment process for them, right? That, okay, well, I guess I'm going to mark you on your attendance, your participation, the number of tests, that you did, and also the exam that I have to give you at the end of the term or the end of the year. So all of those, I guess, situations are very challenging, as an experienced language teacher. And I guess from high school, I went into administration. I was a vice principal for about 4 years. And even at that level, I always thought about myself, you know what, I thought, I know my job is not to teach language to these students, but I'm going to promote language in a different way. And we offered community language classes to parents because these are parents that have already, I don't like to say the word lost their language, because it's not losing your language. It's reawakening or awakening, that language. I guess the language that you have, maybe you learned it when you were very young. And like in my situation, they may have not been exposed to that language as much, maybe during their teen years. And now they're young parents and they can't speak, they can't participate in conversations and so forth. So we did community language programming while I was a vice principal. But I also reinforced language at the junior high level. And believe me, I just couldn't get anybody at that time. We had some speakers, but, they were hesitant. They said, well, I don't know how to write in the language. Well, I'm not fluent. So I thought, you know what, I'll do something anyway. I didn't know what it was I was going to do, but I ended up teaching junior high. I taught them the Ojibwe language, not every day. I think it was every second day or something while I was vice principal. So that's how I contributed at that level. And when I finished after my experience in teaching at the high school and at the elementary level, then I moved on to a master's program. And even then I was just thinking, you know what, I thought I have this passion. I'm not going to give it up. I've already, I have this experience. It doesn't matter if I can't get specialization in Indigenous languages at the master's level. I'm still going to pursue my studies in that area. And I continued on with my studies. So whatever assignments there were at the master's level, I try to make sure that I geared it towards language learning or language teaching research. So that was, at the master's level. So.
First, I want to say, when I hear an Indigenous language speaker speak their language, something inside of me relaxes. It's quite fascinating and interesting what occurs on a physiological level to when you introduced yourself. I was like, oh, I relaxed in that space. So, merci for honoring that and speaking and introducing yourself in that way. And for also challenging the assumptions that when, as a speaker, the assumption that you can teach. And also I appreciate this challenging, this notion of loss, right? This kind of deficit view. So those are some appreciations in hearing you in your journey of language learning, language promotion, and your whole trajectory that has brought you clearly to the U of A in the work that you're doing. So that's one of my wonders of how that all has informed the work you're doing now. But I'm going to, Gil, is there certain appreciations or like what's touched you in regards to what Violet has shared with us so generously?
It's always great to hear someone who's fluent in their language, like if it's Anishinaabe or Nehawa or Michif, because so few of us are, we ended up just not. I mean, I heard it at home, but it wasn't something that I was taught. Cree, that is, and just to hear that there are people out there that are fluent in their language and they're helping keep it alive. And that's so important. That's my observation.
Yeah, so share with us how this is inspiring where you are here at the U of A. And I know you've done some work also in your PhD, this important book that you've created to support language learning and promotion. I'd love to hear how your initial experiences are now kind of informing and influencing in your passion, and as it continues. So beautiful.
Okay. Yeah. When did I come to University of Alberta? Well, first of all, like I did a little bit of research, like when I did my master's, I was tired of studying. I thought, you know what, I'm working full time. I was a full-time school administrator when I was doing my master's of education at that time. And I thought, okay, that's it. Never going to take another course again. So this would have been, I would say, well, maybe in the 1990s. And I'm thinking, and I didn't take any classes for at least a good 8 years after I completed my master's in education, because I was tired. I was just doing way too many things all at once. So just getting really tired and stressed from it. Plus I had a family. I have a family. I have 2 daughters, 2 beautiful daughters, and also have my husband. We're like the way that is, we're still together. I was going to say that we're all still one family, right? So I always had that strong support. My girls always supported what I was doing, and my husband always supported what I was doing. We had some challenges, of course, when you're raising your own children, there's always challenges. You have to stop and help them out along the way. So it wasn't until, I would say, about 10 years later, on the 10th year or the 9th year, that I decided, I said, I think I'm going to do my PhD. So at that time, I approached University of Manitoba, because there was another group at my workplace that were interested in doing their doctorate work. And I thought, okay, well, I want to do that too. So I applied through University of Manitoba, but they told me we only have 2 streams. You can go into special education or school administration. They said, there's nothing in language right now. We probably will have it eventually, whatever. And then I thought to myself, okay, well, I thought, you know what? I need to do it now. Otherwise, I'm going to change my mind in a few months or in a year, whatever. So I did my research on my own. I, went in and out of university websites. And I remember coming across this website called SILD. That's the Canadian Indigenous Languages Literacy Development Summer Institute. And I thought, wow, I need to get into that program. So this would have been maybe about 12, 13 years ago. So I inquired about it. I did a little bit more research on what it was all about. But and then I thought, okay, one way to get into that program, I thought, was to go through the Open Studies program. So I entered the program as a student. I took a couple courses with SILD, and it was such an awesome experience to be able to learn and study Indigenous languages with other people that had the same passion. So I was really inspired, to move ahead with SILD. I thought, okay, I've taken these courses, and now I need more time to look into their PhD program. But before I did that, I was asked if I can teach a couple courses there as well. So of course I thought, okay, well, maybe more experience is better. So I did teach for SILD I think it was for a couple of summers. I taught their curriculum development course for a couple of summers, and from there, I applied for the PhD program. And I know there isn't an Indigenous languages focus in the PhD program here at University of Alberta, but there was a general stream called language and literacy, right? For as an area specialization. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to tackle this and see where I go from there. So I did all my work. I did all my coursework probably in about a year or less than a year. I can't remember the exact time. And I do remember those courses. And I thought, well, as I took each course, I was thinking, well, there's nothing here to do with Indigenous languages. It was just like any other Western language literacy program at the PhD level, which was fine. But what I did for assignments was more focused on Indigenous languages and literacies. And I had really good profs, had really good professors that were very accommodating. So rather than, including a lot of Western theory, Western thoughts into my assignments, into my research papers, I always made sure that there was an Indigenous focus to it, or an Indigenous language focus. And that's where I really became more and more interested in pursuing this and doing more research, right? Because you can only do limited research in each of the courses, right? But for my proposal, I thought, yes, this is what I want to do. And I remember, discussing my proposal with my advisor and saying to her, you know what? I said, it's hard for me to focus. I said, I can't do this narrow focus, because she said, well, think about 2 questions that you would like to research on. I thought, 2? I thought I have hundreds of questions, about our languages. But eventually, through many meetings thereafter, she said, Violet, for a dissertation, need to focus on 2 general questions. And she said, and the rest of research, or the rest of the questions that you have, can come thereafter. Said, but we have to follow the guidelines of the PhD program. So, try your best to try and follow through. So that's what I did. Took all the coursework, did that my proposal, and made sure that it had a focus on Indigenous languages. And because I'm from Manitoba, I thought, I need to focus on what's happening in Manitoba about Indigenous languages. So there were 2 questions that I finally ended up agreeing on, right? We both agreed, my advisor and I finally agreed. And those questions were what language teaching and learning practices have you integrated with Indigenous knowledge systems, and Pimatsuan? That's not the exact question, but generally that was the question. And then the second one was, how would you then integrate Indigenous knowledge systems and Pimatsuan into your language classrooms or your language programs? So generally finding out, what are they doing? Like, what is it that they're doing in their home communities or in their schools, home schools, to make sure that, that not to make sure, but just to find out what they're doing in their language programs. And then thereafter, like, how are you doing this? How is it that you're, you've taught? Like, I was really fortunate. I had 4 participants at the end, and I was so fortunate because they were all from different regions. Like we have, I would say, about maybe 30 Ojibwe Saulteaux communities in Manitoba. And out of the 30, I had 4 language teachers, instructors that agreed to participate in my study, and they came all from different regions. Like, for example, I had somebody that came from the Interlake area. I had somebody 2 actually that came from the I guess that would be the western part of the province. So the regions, and then there was some that were from central Manitoba. So I kind of thought, I never thought that would happen. I just thought, I thought I'll interview, any language teacher, instructor that would like to be part of my study. And of course, there's a process that you have to go through. I had to talk about my program. I had to follow up with about 7 or 10 people before I got, the 4 that agreed to be part of my my program. So for my dissertation. So that was a long process. And yes, I did throw in the towel a couple of times, because like stretching it out to what I think it was 8 years, with the coursework, and then with the proposal, and then with the interviews, because I also traveled to those communities. Like I didn't just meet them in one central place. I would drive to the Interlake area, for example, which was about, I would say, about a 3-hour drive to get to that school to interview that teacher. And then another day I would drive west, which was about a 4-hour drive to get there, and then interview the teacher and be there with him or her for a few hours and then drive back. So sometimes, well, a couple times, 8 hours I was on the road, and the 4 hours I would have been at the school or whatever. So it was very challenging, but because I was so committed and I was very passionate about our languages, I didn't want to give up. And there were things that kind of, made it more challenging for me during certain times of those years. I lost my mom halfway through the process. So that really, I guess, affected me as an educator and, as a person that was trying to finish a program. But I just found it so hilarious because she knew I had my Bachelor of Ed degree and she knew I had a master's. I think she knew, maybe not. I told her I had a Master's of Education degree. And then when I went into my PhD, one day, when she knew I was flying in or driving in to take a course or to attend a program meeting here at University of Alberta, she said to me, how come, she said, you're still in university? Like she couldn't understand why. She probably thought I was still doing my Bachelor of Ed program or something, because I didn't really explain to her, all those different degrees that I was, I guess, working towards. So, and there were so many other experiences that I had with my mother, my mother Florence. So I really missed her. I had to take, I think I took 6 months off for my study at that time, because I just needed to, I needed that time to grieve, and I really needed to continue on after that, because I know she would have wanted me to continue on. So that's what I did. So yeah, so that's kind of my experience with going through the program, the courses, the proposal, the dissertation. And I don't know if it's time to show off my book. Yeah, well, I guess both of you know the dissertation process, right? Editing and adding and deleting. So that went on, I'm sure, for at least maybe 2-3 years, because I didn't work on it full time. During my dissertation years, I was also working full time. I was working full time with the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center. So whatever reading I did, it was mostly weekends or after work hours. And you can't think deeply if you have that kind of a schedule. And I always thought, I wish I could have done this full time. But, being in that situation, I thought I have to try my best, basically, to try and pull through this program. So when I finished my dissertation, believe it or not, I thought I'm never going to read another article, or I'm never going to write another research paper. That's kind of how stressed I was after that. So I didn't, I kind of just, took my time. I, wanted to really concentrate on family, and I was, my job, right, working full time. But, and then thereafter, well, let me just backtrack in regards to all of those years that I spent taking the courses and doing and being part of that dissertation process. And once I had my degree, I thought, well, here's like a 200-page or whatever paper. And I thought, what am I going to do with it? Then I thought, well, I need to share it. I said, because there's not a lot of research papers out there, that have shared their experiences in regards to being a language learner or a language teacher. I know in Manitoba, I couldn't come across any of those research documents. And I really wanted to lift up, those teachers that are out there, those language instructors that work right from the beginning of the morning, right till the end of the day, including after work hours and weekends, to develop those materials, to make sure that their programming is good enough for the students that they're teaching. Because let's say in most schools, there's one Indigenous language teacher. Let's say one of the teachers I interviewed, she had grades 1 to 8, So she never had any preparatory schedules with her. So she taught that, and then in another term, she taught grades 9 to 12. So that's what I'm thinking. Like most of our language teachers, especially the language teachers that are interviewed, were so busy, like not even having that curriculum, developing classroom materials time, because they needed to be in the classroom, because the communities wanted language programs, to be language classes to be taught. So I really feel a lot. I'm very fortunate actually to have had these 4 teachers take that busy time of theirs and be able to sit down with me and to speak to me, and share their knowledge, their experiences about their teaching, and also how they learned the language when they were younger. So after that, I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to just leave my dissertation as it is, because I thought, these teachers, took the time, to meet with me, and I really want to validate their knowledge and their teaching and learning practices that they've shared with me. And I told them, like, after my dissertation was done, I said, I am going to be publishing, I said, my dissertation into a book. I said, I need for you to know that. I said, because I really appreciate all the time and effort that you put into, the interview sessions that we had. And I really appreciate the fact that you were so willing, to share your practices, to show me all the resources that you've been developing the last few years. So as a result of that, this is what was published. I'll put it up very quickly.
Yes.
Learning and Teaching an Ancestral Language, Stories from Manitoba Teachers.
My goodness.
So that's the book, and the publisher is J. Charlton Publishing. I think he's out of BC.
Well, what we'll do is we can include it in the podcast to make sure that we make that resource available and further share that incredible work. And we're coming almost near a close, almost to a clock. So, oh my goodness, I could listen to you all day. So beautiful. And what I'm realizing is, like, you are a trailblazer in Indigenous language. You are one of our trailblazers. So, wow. Yeah. And as I'm hearing and listening to your whole process, wow. Anyway, such an honor to have you on Pop today. We're sitting with a trailblazer. Gil, did you get that also? I'm like, holy trailblazer.
I mean, the program she wanted to do didn't even exist when she wanted to do it. So she had to make it up on her own.
Yeah, created, made it, continued, persevered your passion and your love of Indigenous language and the continuity. And here still you are teaching and promoting at the University of Alberta on this important work. So I just want to feeling so honored for this time and to be sitting with a trailblazer. And a big miigwech for joining us. And Gil, I'm going to pass it on to you also for what kind of final last words you want to share with our trailblazing.
My final thoughts is to our podcast audience: never say never again. Right? When you say, "Oh no, I don't want to do that anymore. No, I don't want to back to school." No. You'll catch that bug again, and you'll keep going. And it's important work too. The work you're doing is important work. I mean, there are so many of our Indigenous languages that need revitalization. 2 off the top of my head: Michif and Prairie Sign Language. It's like, this is, and because a lot of Indigenous people, Cree people, I can speak for, I guess, we're an oral people. We're orators. Right? So that's my final thoughts. And thank you so much for sharing all that with us.
Thank you to both. And one final, I think, what comes to mind, Violet, if you can leave in our minds, if you imagine 2-3 generations ahead, thinking of yourself as this trailblazer in Indigenous language that has carved these incredible new pathways within institutions and our families and our communities. What do you see?
Okay.
It's a big question. Sorry,
it
might be too big of a question. So feel free to answer it. You can just close in whatever message you want to leave for our listeners and for your own.
Well, as you were asking this question, I was thinking, okay, can I say that message in my language? So I was trying to figure out what language to share it. So I'm going to share it in my language first, and then I'll do just a little bit of a translation of it. Ainin dadawenimak apinonchiak kakina chinitanish bemwat anishna kigi godan kimashung sinan gokuminak kinasagoya mano kakinauya chigagwe nitanish bemwat ugwanish apinonchiak kevina waginowesh tapmatsiok apijeonishik ektendagok apiche ektendagok kiwe kigigidoininat. So what I said was, for me, I would really like to see, the children continuing to pick up that language. I always go back to the same words that our elders tell us, our knowledge keepers. Our languages are sacred, so we're not going to lose them. That's why I have a problem with the word losing the language. Our elders tell us we're not losing the language, because our languages are sacred. Our languages are sacred. And if our language are sacred, they are spiritual, right? They are from a spiritual context. And I thought, with spirit never dies. That's what the elders have told us. So I'll leave it at that. And I just want to say, I want to thank University of Alberta that when I graduated, they gave me this eagle feather, and that's what I've been carrying with me. Like when people ask me to talk about my language experience or my experience as a language warrior, or just to talk about my book, I always carry this eagle feather with me. In fact, next week I'm traveling to Flagstaff, Arizona, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on my book along with my husband, because my husband is a longtime teacher as well, pre-language teacher. But I'm also representing SILR, Supporting Indigenous Languages Revitalization, from University of Alberta, of course. And I'm going to be sharing some of those language revitalization activities that we've been organizing for the pre-service teachers here within the Faculty of Education. Miigwech. Hi.
Oh my goodness, wouldn't that be awesome?